So Bakugo has finally returned in this chapter after being dead for like over a year in real time. But like in story time, I don't know, it was like 10 minutes or something. But we got to this point because we thought that All Might was going to die as well. Because in the previous chapter, we saw that he was trying to self-destruct his gauntlet support item inspired by Bakugo, taking himself and All for One out. And coming into this chapter, we even see like this death, post-life dream sequence thing, you know, that we see from time to time. And it's All Might walking down like this stone road. And he says, one of the things I've done the most is looking back at the path I took, because every single step looked so important and the steps are all glowing. And this is significant for multiple reasons, and we'll talk about it towards the end of the video because that's when it's going to come back. But this sequence cuts off because All Might isn't dead. All for One was actually able to stop the gauntlet from self-destructing by stabbing it with his rivet quirk. And I'll give him some credit. All for One does know that, as he says, wounded heroes are always the scariest. I know that very well. So I don't expect him to fully drop his guard here. I mean, makes sense. Then he takes some of All Might's blood and licks it using Stain's blood curdle quirk that he got before he seemingly killed Stain a couple chapters back. And now that All Might is completely out of commission, All for One starts focusing on UA again since they're, so close to it. And he realizes that it's begun floating again because it was falling before, but we saw that Gentle was able to use his quirk awakening, I guess, to keep it afloat. And he's been doing that for like a long time. And he was gonna let it go, but now that All for One's free, he like shoots a lightning energy beam through it or something. And this is devastating. Like, surely some people would have been killed by this because he says UA absorbed the energy, so I missed the target. And it's like, all right. But this is just restarting the ticking clock that UA falling presented in the first place. And I also think it will probably come down to Izuku having to like lift UA himself or just stop it from falling. Like, I think that might be one of his final feats of power, like just straight up like overhead pressing UA as a whole, and then I don't know, like putting it somewhere else or whatever. But and I say that because I recently watched the movie Sky High. If you guys haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's like a fun little, Disney Channel type movie. But wow, a lot of parallels to My Hero Academia, like so many that I think I might one day make a video essay about it. And I have to also add Avatar: The Last Airbender in there because I think those, aside from Marvel Comics, are like the two biggest inspirations on Horikoshi developing this series. But anyway, Star and Stripes X-66 pilot buddies come back, the Americans, and this is great. It's like, oh, they're gonna help, and they were pretty formidable before when they were with Star and Stripe taking on Shigaraki / All for One pseudo persona, whatever was going on at that time. I mean, most of the success came from Star and Stripe, of course, because her quirk was unbelievable, and she almost straight up, quickly and cleanly killed Shigaraki, but unfortunately, Horikoshi realized that he had made a mistake and took her out, just as All for One is taking out the X-66 pilots here. I mean, wow. It is one swipe of his hand and they are all destroyed. I mean, not like exploding, like you see their wings coming off, so I guess this means that the pilots are surviving this. But that was super anticlimactic. Like, what's even the point of bringing them in here? I guess to just show that, like, hey, they were around for a little bit, but now they're just useless. They helped Izuku, but now their purpose is done, so just get them out of here. And speaking of Izuku, we see him still in a stalemate with Shigaraki, and he's just watching what All for One is about to do to All Might, along with the rest of the world, because this is being broadcast, of course, by the students at UA, and there's like a helicopter from a news station. I think the helicopter's still around. Maybe it was destroyed. I don't really remember. But at the minimum, it's being recorded by the students because we straight up see them struggling to continue to film in this chapter. The one with the Karen Emperor looking haircut. And as All for One is about to straight up pull All Might apart at the waist. Like, we even see his stomach ripping a little bit. Like, this is pretty gruesome. And I was thinking, like, wow, this might actually line up with Night Eye's prophecy, because he did say that it would be gruesome. But no, it is not time for that yet. It might not ever be the time for All Might to die, because Bakugo is back. He is the last person who who is able to save All Might at this point, and he makes a spectacularly brightly shining entrance emanating from UA. And we see him a little drowsy looking, but he still has the clusters around him. And we see that Izuku notices him, and Bakugo also notices Izuku. And before I go into the final sequence of this chapter, let me bring you up to speed on how Bakugo died in the first place, and why he is very likely to be ultra powerful right now. Like, so powerful that he can probably defeat All for One. I know that sounds crazy, but let me explain his new quirk awakening, I guess you could say, that he unlocked before he died, or ultimate ability, his quirk ultimate, whatever you want to call it. So as Bakugo was fighting against All for One / Shigaraki at UA, like before Izuku showed up, in the final moments of that fight, Bakugo was using his cluster ability by like firing off little beads of sweat from his palms and making like multiple explosions from it. However, he was going so hard against Shigaraki that he kept saving up the sweat in the glands in his palms, but it was putting like way too much of a burden on them. So those sweat beads that he kept building up spread throughout his body and started exiting from other sweat glands. And this caused him to essentially create his own version of Izuku's full cowling of One for All. Because think about it, you have all of these little micro explosions coming from the sweat glands in your body. So you're being propelled at all times. To a, of course, superhuman extent. I mean, Bakugo was already superhuman, just even without his quirk. But now that he has this cluster upgrade, his ultimate, his quirk awakening. But real quick, guys, Gamer Supps now has tea. They have caffeine-free flavors like Sleepy Time with Zhoniin and ginger turmeric, as well as caffeinated black tea and yerba mate for focus. And you can actually get a free box of tea by purchasing the new Waifu Cup Royal Tea, which is dropping today at 3 p.m. Eastern. So guys, my link will be in the description, and make sure you use code BIGZ for 10% off. Thanks, guys. He can now finally move the way that he's always wanted to, which is essentially like using One for All at 60%. I don't know how strong he is in comparison to the percentages, but in the previous war, I think Bakugo said that he was like strong enough to keep up with like 40% of One for All or something. Somewhere around there. I forget the exact percentage. Please let me know in the comments. Haven't read that chapter in like 2 years, but I would say given how strong Bakugo is now with his cluster upgrade, and given that we are in the last 20 or so chapters of the series, I'm going to say that he is gotta be like between 60 to 80% of the power of One for All. Strictly from a mobility standpoint. Obviously not talking about the quirks and the punching power, all that stuff. That's nonsense. We're just talking about mobility here. But as for his power set, aside from the mobility and the micro explosions that he has, in his final moment against Shigaraki, he's firing off this like condensed explosion that is just straight up like a energy beam. So I guess he can do that stuff now. Like his explosions are essentially just ki blasts. I mean, they're not, but you know what I'm talking about. Which is a good upgrade, because if we're looking at Bakugo as a whole and who he was always supposed to become, I think this is extremely fitting. And if I was writing his character personally, I would have him have the same outcome as well. Just be super fast, super agile, and then just have like energy projectiles or some kind of other projectile from your palms. I think it's the perfect move set for the type of character that Bakugo is. I mean, don't get me wrong, he always kind of had that on a smaller scale, but I'm talking about like on a One for All, you know, typical manga superhero Dragon Ball Z adjacent type abilities. But after this new ultimate of Bakugo was revealed, he put it on display and he like straight up speed blitzed Shigaraki, dodged his strikes. It was ultra impressive. Like even like the heroes watching it were shocked. But it was very short-lived, because as he went to go after Shigaraki again, he just immediately goes into a dream sequence, post-life, whatever thing, you know, similar to what we were talking about with All Might in the beginning. And it's Bakugo looking at All Might's vestige ghost. And he says that he always wanted All Might to autograph his All Might card that he got with Izuku at the same time when they were kids. It was like a big moment in their lives. And we're going to talk about that again, of course. But as we came back to the present at that point, Bakugo was getting pierced through the chest by Shigaraki, and he was dead. Like literally he was done. And after a crazy sequence of events and a few chapters, long story short, Best Jeanist does his best to sew up Bakugo's heart with some dirty denim, but then Edgeshot uses his own ultimate quirk to spaghettify himself and uses these thin strands to pass through one of Wash's bubbles to sterilize himself. This actually happened, I'm not joking. And then fed himself into Bakugo's heart and then repaired the damage, along with damage to his lungs, with his own body. You know, taking himself out in the process, of course, and fully healing Bakugo, and also, as it says, aiding cardiopulmonary function. And then after that, I'm pretty sure we didn't see Bakugo until this chapter. So it's like, what fully brought him back? Was it just once Edgeshot was finished with his procedure, he just came back? I don't think that's the case. I'm thinking it was All Might's vestige ghost that gave the spark for Bakugo to come back. Because in the previous chapter, when Izuku thinks that All Might is about to die against All for One, the narration says that the One for All vestige within Izuku Midoriya signaled its departure slightly in advance, and it just disappears. And Izuku freaks out, rightfully so. And we thought that that meant that All Might was dying, but I don't think that's what it meant. I think it now meant that it was like leaving the quirk factor of One for All, and then somehow, through space and time, transferring itself to Bakugo, and then using whatever kind of crazy supernatural quirk abilities to revive him. And one way to explain this, I guess, is that if the Two Heroes movie is fully canon, and I mean like everything in that movie canon, then Bakugo at one point technically did have One for All. So I guess the residual quirkiness that was left in him had enough of a signal for All Might's vestige to latch onto. But back to this chapter, because Bakugo is not only just standing there in a cool pose, but he also has that All Might card. The very same All Might card that we saw in that death sequence, also on the ground next to Bakugo's dead body, but we also see like a revised flashback / dream sequence that ties into the beginning with All Might walking down that stone road, you know, saying that every single step looks so important. But now instead of Bakugo and Izuku holding these cards, they're holding All Might's steps. Which of course means that All Might doesn't need to take the rest of his precious steps because he's giving it to the next generation. Which also, of course, ties into the title of the chapter, the end of an era and the beginning. So I think this ultimately is leading to Bakugo successfully saving All Might, meaning that All Might might straight up not die, which is great because, you know, this whole time we were like, when's it gonna happen? When's it gonna happen? It has to happen, right? Because Night Eye's prediction, but Izuku broke Night Eye's prediction before, and if anybody else can do that, it's certainly Bakugo. And this will also finally complete Bakugo's character arc, I think, because Bakugo feels as though he is responsible for All Might being powerless in the first place. You know, since back in the 3rd season, it was the League of Villains who kidnapped Bakugo and tried to forcefully recruit him, which led to All Might trying to save him, only to wind up fighting All for One in that big epic battle with the United States of Smash, which ultimately took the rest of All Might's power. And because All Might was doing it to save Bakugo, Bakugo felt responsible. So now if Bakugo can come back and save All Might from being killed, that would be massive. But not only that, I think he's also going to defeat All for One as well. Like, I'm thinking that Bakugo is going to, of course, pick up where All Might left off, because All Might said that if he was going to hit All for One with that gauntlet explosion, he would have essentially regressed back to like a toddler with his rewind because of the stress that it would have taken to heal himself with multiple quirks. So I'm thinking Bakugo is going to do this. He's going to do some Kamehameha or something, or just like a 20-piece speed rush combo and revert All for One back to like a toddler, like a 5-year-old or something. And then I think that's when Shigaraki finishes him for good. But let me know what you think about this in the comments, guys. Are you excited that Bakugo's back? What do you think the ultimate resolution is going to be here? Let me know. And if you liked the video, guys, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.